repeat something every 3 days for a duration of a month. And then the following month I would repeat it every 5 days. And then the month after I would repeat it every week. And then the month after I would repeat it bi-weekly. And then I would only visit it every month. And then I would visit it twice every 2 months. And so on. So some scholars would say that you would do it, some scientists would say you would do it in an expanded form. Others would say you would do it in a spaced form, but it doesn't have to be expanded. All in all, both of them agree on one aspect, that it has to be spaced. When you cram things in a short period of time, you would lose it. Okay? So repeating in short period of time would give you, things would be saved in your short-term memory. You cannot retrieve it, you cannot retain it for years. But when you repeat things, repeat practices for a longer period of time, you would save whatever you're learning in your long-term memory, so you will have longer, better retention. And there is a famous study that has been done by K. Anders Ericsson in the 70s, I believe. He did a study which Gladwell has referred to in, I guess, in Outliers, which is the idea of 10,000 hours. Have you heard about this idea that in order to become... He studied a sample of professional musicians and professional sports players and professional artists. And he found that for them to reach an expert performance, they had to spend 10,000 hours practicing. And these 10,000 hours, they were spaced. If you think about it, it's almost like 4 years of study in a university. Almost. 4 or 5 years of working every day, only few hours per day. But what happens that we go to universities, we don't study every day. We study only few days in the month that are before deadlines, the night before the deadline. So what do? We waste these 4 years, and the result is the knowledge is not saved in our long-term memory. We don't use the 4 years period as a catalyst for, or as a facilitation for the saving things in our long-term memory. Another side note, I know I'm going a little bit off topic. There is a difference between, this is something to add to whatever we mentioned now. There is a difference, and this difference between al-hifz and al-istihdar. Memorizing and retention. And this difference between al-hifz and al-istihdar is present in the works of the Turath and is present in the Western scientific discourse as well. Both of them separate between these two notions. Memorizing is usually about repeating words, vocalizing them, which is in Arabic ترديد الألفاظ or tasmi'. If you've heard that word before, that Arabic word before, tasmi'. You just keep repeating things, and perhaps just covering the paper and then just reciting over or many times. By the way, if a person does this method in a spaced fashion, it would be better than doing it in a cramped fashion. But this is not my intention to say. My intention is to say that this is something, okay? Memorization. Al-istihdar is perhaps recalling, which is repeating, but not the words. You repeat the meaning. Okay? So when you read, you cover and then you try to explain to yourself what the author says. Not to not to recite the words over and over again, but actually covering the page and saying it in your own words. But see, sometimes in the beginning it would be necessary for you to memorize until you develop language skills that would allow you to substitute words and use different vocabulary to illustrate different meanings and so on and so forth. Okay. So memorization is about reciting words. Recall is about repeating the meanings. Memorizing is about the specific words, regardless of what they mean. But in recall, you would start also looking for connections between the meanings of different paragraphs. Because you would start adding a paragraph to another, and you would start working out the connections between them. You know, in other words, what is called chunking. You would start chunking things and connecting these chunks together. In other words, you develop information into knowledge. Okay? By connecting these things, the relationships between different information. So again, recall is about meanings, not words. Recall is about connecting ideas together, so that would require repetition, but repetition while using the rational capacity in thinking and understanding and comprehending. Yes?
Increasing the frequency of recalling increase the power of memorize.
Not necessarily.
If we recall
both of them depend on the memory, if that's what you mean.
No, if you recall something from your memory by another times or in several times, will increase your memory.
But see what I mean by do you mean here recall as I mentioned it?
No, recall use the information have in your memory.
Okay. Okay. So see the word recall, you would either use it to say that when a person is repeating something over and over again, and every time tries to remember what he said, that would increase the power of memory. This is what you mean. Okay, I just don't want to use the word recall for two different meanings, so people won't get mixed up. Yeah, of course, when you test your memorization, that would help you strengthen your memory. That's true. Self-tests are methods of developing skills in that. But the idea here is one method, which is al-hifz, is about memorizing the words as they are written in the book. Recall is about, if we want to say memorization, it will be about memorizing, but not the words, the meanings. So memorization is about remembering the words. Recalling is about remembering the meaning and connecting meanings together and applying the meaning, implementing it, practicing it, taking it from one context to different context. This is recall. And you would find, for example, Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, in some biographies, in Al-Durar al-Kamina, I believe, if I'm not mistaken by my memory, but Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar was describing how one of the scholars, he was strong, قوي الحفظ, but in al-istihdar, he was not as powerful. In other words, he could sit and recite the book from beginning to end. But then when they are discussing a certain topic, he would not be able to recall what he learned. Because when he learned, he memorized words. So he could only vocalize it, recite it. But when there is a certain context, and then he wants to cite something by word, he can't remember. Okay? And Imam al-Razi, Imam Ibn Sina actually before Razi, and Razi said the same thing, that memorizing and or the power of memory and the power of thinking, they are opposites. It's almost like a seesaw between them. Okay? If you develop a very, very strong skill in memorizing, I'm not saying recalling now, memorizing. In other words, be very concerned about the words, regardless of the meanings. Just memorizing letters as they are written. Okay? If you develop that very much, this hinders the development of thinking skills, and vice versa. And this perhaps explains why, even in the history of Islam, you find scholars who were very extreme in their specialization of hadith, that hindered their presence in fiqh, and vice versa as well. There are all, sometimes the seesaw is not as, the gap is not as big. So some people are able to keep some sort of equilibrium, so to speak. But generally speaking, the person who memorizes a lot, that would hinder their thinking. So the way, if a person is looking to establish an equilibrium, it's through istihdar, through recalling, not through memorization. Only in the beginning you would require memorization. This is something that Ibn Hisham has said in Mughni Labib, and Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar has said as well. Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar in the beginning of Nuzhat al-Nadar, he was talking about how books of hadith were summarized. So he said, وَاخْتُصِرَتْ لِتُفْهَمْ, something like that. وَاخْتُصِرَتْ لِتُفْهَمْ. So it was summarized so it would be understood. So one of his students said, we would say, somebody would think that if it was summarized, so it would be memorized. But it was summarized so it would be understood. How's that? So Hafid Muhammad said, so when the person reaches the end of the book, he would remember what was said in the beginning of the book. So they did these mutun texts for the reason of having an outline. Okay? So when you reach chapter 5, you still remember what they said in chapter 1. That was the reason of that outline. When did the problem occur? When students became so embraced and they celebrated these outlines more than the meanings of the words of these outlines. So they became so involved into memorizing these words correctly with a correct tashkil and correct qira'ah and so on, and spent so much time in learning the different wujuh, different ways to read these mutun, and then spend less time in understanding them. Okay? And that's why some scholars, on the other hand, like Ibn Khaldun and some of the Malikis, and the Andalusis, they were not really fond of complicated summaries, the very, compact summaries that were written. Mutun, they were not really fond of these. And that perhaps is reflected even when they studied Ilm al-Kalam. You would find those in the Eastern Muslim world, they studied the book called Al-Mawaqif, which was explained in a way called Al-Sharh al-Masji. Al-Sharh al-Masji is when the person writing the explanation would put the words of the author of the text, they would write it in red, or put a red, this is how it is in manuscripts, or put a red line above the text of the main text, alright? And then he would add the explanation in between. So it's almost as if it's the same book, as if the book was folded and then it's open. So when you open the book physically, you would open it in the explanation He would open the meanings by adding words in between the words of the author. So if you would read them together without paying attention to whatever between the brackets, whatever is being lined with a red line or something, you would not note a difference. You would think that this book was actually written that way in the very beginning. And that the people in the Western Muslim world, like in Al-Maghrib, they did not study Al-Mawaqif. They studied Al-Maqasid by Imam al-Taftazani, because he wrote the explanation on it by what is called Qala Aqul. So he would say Qala, and then would mention whatever the author says, and then he would say, I would say, in explaining this, and then he would start elaborating. This explains to us why Imam al-Shatibi, for example, and his shuyukh, Abu Ishaq al-Shatibi, the author of Al-Muwafaqat, and his shuyukh were very much against Imam ibn Arafah when he wrote his short matn, or not short, compact matn in what is called Al-Mukhtasar al-Fiqhi, or the short summary of fiqh in the Maliki madhab. They were Al-Qabbab, the Sheikh of Imam Abu Ishaq al-Shatibi radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, criticized Al-Qabbab, Al-Qabbab criticized Imam ibn Arafah very much for writing that book. And I hope I remember all the names and the tawarikh correctly, hopefully. So they were against these books that made all the all the aim, all the objective, all the main concern, the main goal is to understand the words. Because they were very much they were so summarized that they would have to spend years in understanding what are these words stand for, before they get into actually discussing the science itself, discussing the matters, the ideas, just to try to understand what is that author trying to say to begin with, regardless of al-mas'ala, regardless of the subject matter. So it takes them years again to start learning the matter itself, the subject itself. This is some of the dynamics that you would find in al-Turath regarding hifz, regarding istihdar, regarding learning things as in one shot, or learning them gradually, and all the dynamics between these elements. And more could be said here, but let's move on to the seventh duty. He says, "And la yakhuda fi." I started to say in Arabic. I apologize. So he says that the person is not supposed to be to start learning something before learning which is obvious of what we said, before learning the prerequisites of it. In other words, if you're studying, physics, if you want to study physics 3.1, you would have to finish physics 2.1 before it. It's obvious. Make sure that you have accomplished or have acquired the requirements or the prerequisites of whatever science or area of knowledge you're learning. And then the eighth duty, he is saying that the student, when he or she they're learning something, they have to know the reason or the cause for learning it. Why are you learning this? And he says the why question in learning is always would always result in one of two answers. The why question in learning, why am I learning this? You would the answer would be either you're learning this because this is noble, this is a noble science, because of its subject matter perhaps, or because of its utility or result, a-thamara. So either a-thamara, and actually what he says, I apologize, I said nobility, it should be the strength or the validity of the proofs. I apologize. So the nobility of the science depends on one or two things. Why am I learning this? Why is this noble? Why is this important? Either because of the result or the utility of it, or because of the proofs in that science are very much or in the highest level of proofs. For example, the proofs in philosophy, for example, or in math, they are barahin. They're very, very much strong logical proofs. Meanwhile, in language, it's based on narration. It's not logical proofs. So one might say that, one could argue, math is much better than nahu, than language, than grammar, because math is based on the solid proofs of logic. Meanwhile, language is just mere narrations. You just study it because it is like that. Why do you say he is, not he are? Because that's the way it is. You don't demand from the teacher to give you a logical reason why we're not allowed to say he are, and we can say they is. But you can demand an explanation of Pythagoras' theorem if you are capable of understanding it. See the difference? So Imam Al-Ghazali says it's either one of those. Either the strength of the proof, or the utility, or the fruit you will reap out of studying that field. And he said it's always better to pay attention to al-thamara more than the strength of the proof. In other words, learn what gives you the results you need. And then the ninth duty, that in all times, even after the person goes through some kind of meditation or trying to develop a moral character or something of that sort, during all times, the person, while learning, is supposed to do that meditation in parallel to learning. So it's not something that you do in the beginning and then you forget all about it. But rather, as the person is learning, he says, أن يكون قصد المتعلم في الحال تحلية باطنه. In other words, that while you're learning, you keep working on purifying your mind, purifying your soul. And it's not something that you would do and then don't return to it again. And then the 10th duty is to understand that the learner is supposed to understand the relationship between sciences. See, certain sciences are utilities, are tools to acquire other sciences. So he's saying that the student is supposed to understand that relationship. How, for example, language affects fiqh, as we were talking about, or adab al-bahth wal-munadhara affects fiqh. How usul al-hadith affects fiqh. How fiqh affects studying hadith, perhaps, and so on and so forth. So the student is supposed to link أن يعلم نسبة العلوم إلى المقصد. In other words, you need to know the objective of learning something, the relationship between the means to the end. Whether that objective is learning another science, or whether that objective is practicing something. So in case of fiqh, for example, the result could be practicing. So the person needs to understand the relationship between the science and the objective of that science. Whether that objective is implementing something practically, or using that knowledge, that sum of knowledge, in order to acquire another field of knowledge. Okay. And then Imam Al-Ghazali then later on gives I will leave that to you to read, and perhaps if you want to reflect on it next time. He uses a metaphor of a hajj and the different aspects of al-hajj, 3 different aspects in al-hajj, and then he uses those 3 aspects to take them from this example in this ritual, which is pilgrimage, and then he would apply the same 3 aspects on sciences or on learning. Okay, and then he mentioned in the duties of al-mu'allim, the teacher, 7 duties. He starts these 7 duties by a metaphor, and that metaphor is a person. When a person is dealing with wealth, with money, he is either accumulating money, acquiring, or saving. You're either getting money, or saving money, or spending money, or thinking of how to invest it, or develop it, okay, or spend it. So these are 4 cases. You either acquire it and accumulate it, or you save it, or you spend it, or you're thinking about how to do one of these 3 things, right? So these are the 4 cases with money. He says, knowledge is like money. So sometimes you're thinking about it, sometimes you are acquiring knowledge. Sometimes you are saving knowledge. We're just talking about that. Sometimes you are spending knowledge. Sometimes you're thinking about how you do those 3 things, which is perhaps the subject of adab al-alim wal-muta'allim. How to acquire knowledge, how to maintain and retain knowledge, how to disseminate and deliver and communicate knowledge. This is adab al-alim wal-muta'allim, about these 3 things. So he starts talking about that adab al-alim is how to deliver, how to spend that knowledge. He says that, very interesting, that the very first duty he gives, al-wazifatu al-ula, the first task is ash-shafaqatu ala al-muta'allimin. That to have empathy for the learners. And he said that he would deal with them like his children. And some people would think that this is, Imam Al-Ghazali is being soft, he's being kind, he's being merciful. But there is something very interesting when he says that when he deals with them as his children, there are 2 very important ideas here. One, that they said to the learner, you should deal with your shaykh. That al-walidu fil ilm is more important than the father by lineage, by kinship, by genes. That the spiritual connection with the teacher is higher than the family connection, perhaps because of genes or because of lineage. So in turn, he says to the teacher, you have to deal with the students like you're dealing with your children. The much more powerful reason for him to say that if you ask any father, who's the person that you are looking to see him or her better than you? They say, my children. So in other words, he's saying to the teacher, you should be concerned that your students will become better than you. So then the teacher should not be jealous if he finds a certain student, if he visualizes the future of that student to be higher than him. So this is very important. He did not just say it because he is being merciful, but there is something added to it. That the teacher should look to the students to be better than him. And this is why when giving advice, teachers would say, I made that mistake, don't do that. Just like parents. You find a parent who says to his son or daughter, when I was in your age, I made something wrong. I did not find somebody to stop me from doing this, and this is why I'm doing so with you now. So, same thing goes with the same thing goes with the teacher as well. And that goes for advice, and that goes for effort, and that goes for time dedication. One of my shuyukh in Ijaza, Sheikh Abdul Razak Al-Halabi, he used to, and this was narrated to me, I did not see it, because I received the chain of narration by a method of somebody who would ask for Ijaza for different students of knowledge, and my name was with them. But it was narrated to me that Sheikh Abdul Razak Al-Halabi used to, when he used to go in winter, when he used to go to a lesson, he used to dress more than one clothes, or one over the other, over the other, over the other. So when he would go to attend the lesson, while he's walking, going up to the chair where he would deliver the lecture, he would check out the students. So if he sees any students, any of his students, lacking a jacket or something to wear, he would take it off and give it to them. So just like how a father would do that with his children. I remember once I was attending a lesson with one of he's not considered to be one of my shuyukh, was only attended for a short period of time, but when I was attending with him, and we were at his office, and then I was we're drinking tea, and he was a little bit casual because we're a very small group, and I accidentally poured all the hot tea on my leg, on my foot. And he was delivering, he was explaining the book. So he stood up very quickly, and he actually went down, took off my socks and was looking for tissues, right in the middle of the lesson. And he stopped the lesson for that. He says that the second duty, that the teacher is supposed to take, the role model is, he says, صاحب الشرع, meaning the role model for the teacher should be the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. See, Imam Al-Ghazali did something very interesting. He did not start like this. He did not say that the first duty is to take the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam role model. He said, be a father. Because if you are unable to be human, how would you follow the Prophet ﷺ? See? Because some people say, Imam Al-Ghazali he should have mentioned the Prophet ﷺ first. But he actually mentioned what would allow the teacher to follow the Prophet ﷺ. And then the third duty, he says that he should not leave any kind of advice or recommendation for the student without telling him that advice or recommendation. And then he said he should actually stop the student from indulging into something higher than his level. And this is very similar to a parent who's trying to stop his son or daughter from doing something that they're not prepared for it yet. And he's almost saying that the teacher is supposed to do like the parent, which is hate me now and then love me later. You know that kind of style in parenting? Hate me now but love me later. So he's almost saying the same thing for the teacher. Let them hate you now, because they would see you as stopping them from, they have all that enthusiasm, they're being wild, like wild horses trying to do everything at the same time. And you're trying to, they would see you as confining that enthusiasm, but rather you're trying to channel it correctly. And this is from, one could infer from this that Imam Ghazali is indicating implicitly, he's not explicitly saying this, but implicitly, that perhaps even between the students and the teacher, there is a clash of generations. Like how would that happen between parents and children as well? That is why in the beginning he said to the teacher, be like a parent. And then the fourth task, and he says this is very subtle and intricate, and people should pay attention to it. That the teacher should never critique or criticize or warn the student of bad behavior in a direct method. The teacher should actually abstain from that, but rather give things in indirect communication, or things that would be understood in an implicit form. And then the fifth task, that the person who's teaching something, perhaps somebody is teaching language, while the student is learning also fiqh, and is learning tafsir, and is learning usul al-fiqh, and so on. So the person teaching language should not have the students hate fiqh, or look down on mantiq, or see that the only important thing is language and everything else is not that important. So the teacher who's specialized in something should not how would I say this? Should not promote his field over other fields, but rather, yes, explain, illustrate, show the importance of your specialization without looking down upon other areas of knowledge as well. In other words, help the student to acquire things from other teachers as well. And then the sixth, which is very obvious and it's very important as well, the sixth duty is that the teacher should only give what is suitable for the learner. And this is perhaps the utmost primary role for the teacher. See, Imam Bukhari radiallahu ta'ala anhu, in Kitab al-Ilm, he was explaining ولكن كونوا ربانيين. He says الرباني هو الذي يعلم الناس صغار العلم قبل كباره. الرباني, the person that he's a scholar, or he's a person who teaches his students the beginnings of knowledge before the ends. صغار العلم, the very introductions. كبار العلم are the conclusions. So he's the person who starts with the introductions before the conclusions. He is the person who was described that part of his characteristic, that his learned knowledge from a divine source. And we can say so much in this, but a metaphor that would illustrate this: a teacher who gives, who presents knowledge that are not suitable for the learners is almost like a parent who's giving a newborn grilled chicken, or in Egypt, mulukhiyah, kushari, for example. Or kosher, if you want to say it in an American accent. So giving kosher to a child is almost like giving a beginner intricate matters and difficult matters in ilm al-kalam, for example. This is, see how the Prophet ﷺ, the things that he would say to Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, is different than whatever would be told to the general public of the community of the Sahaba. So the teacher should note that as well. Not everything to be given to the teacher, to the student. And see, just like spending money, not all the time you would spend all your money, you would give out everything, but rather be sensible in spending. And the more sensible you are, the better investor you are, right? So same thing in teaching. The more sensible you are, the better results you get out of that spending. The less harm out of that spending. And then the seventh duty, and the last duty that he mentioned for the teacher, that he says that if a student, for example, is not as intelligent, so that he should start with the apparent, things that are apparent for him, which is almost like the task before this. But then he added something in this task. He said, when the student is struggling, don't mention things. Don't tell him, look, this is all that you need now. There are other ideas that I have hidden from you at this point. And when you reach a higher level, I'll expose these ideas. I will reveal them to you. But see, this is what Imam Al-Ghazali said, and this is in principle what the teacher is supposed to do. But you would find in books, scholars would write something that says, and this is what is suitable for this level. So sometimes it is also important for the teacher to let the students understand that this is not that, because sometimes they would think that this is all there is. So the teacher would then need to say, look, there are additional things, but you have acquired all that is necessary for your level. So he would bring it that way. You have acquired all that is necessary for your level. When you go next year, you will learn more into that. So every now and then would need to give a hint that there is more into it. Because if also the teacher does not do this, students would think that this is all there is and they have acquired everything. And this is also harmful. So he should do both of them in a very sensible fashion. Okay. Any questions? Concerns? We went longer this time because we have two more sections that we're supposed to finish next time, inshallah, with certificates as well. I'm trying as much as possible to stick to and I told you guys last time, if you guys recall, that we're trying as much as possible to finish in the 8 lectures as we have mentioned, right? We have the possibility, or actually we have the opportunity, if we wanted to do an expansion to a 9th week, we could do that, all right? But as much as possible, even if we go a little bit above the edge next time, but I guess it will be much more fruitful for you guys and also for me as well to finish on time rather than take it to stretch it to another 9th week. Okay? I'm just letting, I know I'm going, I know it's difficult for you to spend, over than 2 hours in a lesson, but, again, I'm trying to put the priority of finishing on time. So I apologize for that. Yes, sir.
May I ask you the questions, sir, about the memorizing
Okay.
and recalling?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, which one is important? Or I rephrase the question, if I want to learn something, which one should I start first? Recall first or memorize first?
Okay, generally speaking, recalling is more important. And you would have to differentiate between memorization and memory. Memorization is a practice, is a form of something that you do. Memory is a power, is a capacity in your mind that is used both by recall and by memorization. The only difference is that in recall, what is saved in memory is a meaning. In memorization, what is saved in the memory, they're words. Memorization is good in one condition, given one condition. If you use it to facilitate recall, how would you do that? For example, if you are commuting as a student and you spend a lot of time in transportation, and perhaps not all the time it is available to you that you open a book to keep practicing that recall. So then memorization would serve the purpose of allowing the words of the author being in your mind. Whenever you want to remember them, you're able to, in order to practice recall without depending on a printed book. So if memorization is used for the sake of facilitating recall, then it's good. And also on another condition, until you reach a level of developing good language skills where you don't need to stick to the words of the author perhaps, but rather be able to use your own words. But sometimes this is why they, maybe in the beginning, they spoon-feed knowledge just to build a basic foundation. You find this in language skills even for children. In the beginning, they don't ask from them to articulate meanings on their own. They memorize vocabulary words. And it's not necessarily memorizing, but they give them in songs, which is almost like memorizing, but just like songs, which is better because, yes, they're memorizing words, but they are doing memorization in a way that develops connections as well. Alright? So they would connect things together. But in the end, you would find all children memorizing songs of vocabulary until they have a good data bank. And you would find them, especially in the West, you may not find this in the East. They would say, for example, at the age of so-and-so, the amount of vocabulary words that a child should have is 500 words, is 1,000 words, and they would actually sometimes highlight these keywords in stories or in textbooks and so on, until they reach a level where they have enough synonyms, for example, where they don't need to, they stop this idea of vocabulary words, and then they introduce dictionaries. And they ask the students, when you're coming to class, bring a dictionary, bring a thesaurus. They don't ask them anymore to memorize vocabulary lists or anything of that sort. And perhaps you'd find the vocabulary exercises in textbooks, they are very much reduced. And then they ask them to use the words in context, and to define them in context, and to paraphrase things, and to say things in your own words. So same things happen in the ulum shar'i as well. A person would memorize some short nazm, which is a poem or a matn, until they develop good language skills, and then they would not need to memorize anymore. I hope I answered your question. Okay, any other questions? Concerns? Okay. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك واتوب اليك